High Crane Drifter is the 17th episode of the third season of Frasier. This is directed by Philip Charles MacKenzie, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode. And it starts off quite differently, with Roz actually hosting Frasier's show down at KCL, and it's unclear to begin with why this is, but we learn that Frasier is running late. And once he finally arrives, we realise it's because somebody has significantly inconvenienced him, and he becomes really annoyed by people with bad manners and people being inconsiderate. And this is what this episode is all about. And I think that there are some really powerful messages in this episode. And for me, a strong sense of relatability, because I very much am with Frasier 100%. At least with regards to how he was feeling. I very much hate people who are inconsiderate. And this is exactly what Frasier feels. And I don't necessarily always agree with his behaviour, but certainly some things I do. So if you can relate to this, I think you will really get a lot out of this episode. Just that understanding that other people get irritated by this as well. And I don't have too many thoughts beyond, yes, I agree with that, and yes, I agree with that, and yes, this is a good message. So I will mention those as we go through it, but my thoughts are not too detailed. And we then go to a video store after we've been to KCL, which I love. Always such a fun setting. Always love looking at the video covers, trying to see what I can identify. And it actually starts off with Frasier holding the door open for somebody who's leaving the video store, and they don't even acknowledge his existence, and he very loudly says you're welcome afterwards. And I do that. I do that when somebody doesn't acknowledge me when I hold a door open for them, and one day somebody is going to turn around and punch me in the face, I'm sure of it. But that for me is something that really annoys me. I know occasionally somebody can be having a bad day and they're lost in their own world, but generally speaking, there's no excuse for it. And I think that's the point when I realised this episode is going to speak to me a lot. Frasier is trying to get a copy of How Green Was My Valley. It doesn't work very well because there's only one copy, somebody else gets it. We have the brilliant line when somebody phones up the video store and they're clearly asking for a video, and the worker says, "Do we have The Invisible Man?" And Frasier says yes, referring of course to himself, which I really thoroughly enjoyed. He then goes home, and then we hear loud music. And this is also something that I detest. I think a little bit of loud music from neighbours now and then is absolutely fine, but if you have a neighbour who does it constantly, utterly horrendous. I've been in that situation. I can completely feel for Frasier, and things are just not going his way. And then it just goes from bad to worse to even worse. He goes down to Cafe Nervosa with Niles, and it's very busy. And they see a table, and they go to get this table, and somebody else takes it from them. And that as well is something that really bothers Frasier, and he takes action. And he basically kicks the inconsiderate person out of Cafe Nervosa. This is kind of where I draw the line at the relatability. I feel like that's maybe a step too far for me. I don't think I would ever confront somebody that much for being... But it seemed to go down really well, and it made the newspaper, as you know, radio's Dr. Frasier Crane did this really brilliant thing and giving a rude person a taste of their own medicine, really, by treating them not very nicely in return. And we find this out quite delightfully, actually, when we see Martin and Daphne singing these lyrics to this song, and we kind of assume that those lyrics are from the musician in the penthouse upstairs, which I thought was rather entertaining. And we then find out he's in the paper. Niles comes over. Niles is quite jealous. And I loved Niles, especially towards the end of this episode, but I'll get there in a moment. Frasier actually goes to work, and he's getting a lot of people calling in who have, of course, heard about what he did, and they're really taking inspiration from what he did and following his lead, but a lot of them are taking it one step further, and they're crossing the line from justice into really negative behaviour. And Frasier made a really good point, and I'm really glad that he kind of came to this realisation, because this is what I was feeling when he behaved this way. He kind of came to the realisation that he shouldn't have done what he did to the man in Cafe Nervosa, because it wasn't his place to do that. And even if people think that that's acceptable, where do you draw the line? And this is what he's seeing with his callers. They may have thought what he did was acceptable, but they're taking it a step further or several steps further. And you need to draw the line somewhere. But who's to say that that line is above what Frasier did? And I think that that's definitely really insightful. And he points out that the key is restraint. To not let your emotions get the better of you. Should I have restraint and not loudly proclaim you're welcome if somebody doesn't thank me or even acknowledge me for holding a door open? Probably, because saying it doesn't fix anything, but it could cause a problem. So maybe I shouldn't do that. I don't think I'm going to stop doing it, mostly because it's kind of a reflex more than anything else. But I think he has a valid point that it's better to try and have restraint, because chances are what you're going to do isn't actually going to solve the problem. And he decides to apologise to the man at Cafe Nervosa. And unfortunately, this is not a good guy, because he uses this to his advantage to sue Frasier. And I loved Niles at this point. Niles really took advantage of the situation, partly because he doesn't want Frasier to be sued. It's his brother. Of course, he's going to stand up for him. But also because, as he mentioned previously, he was kind of jealous that Frasier was able to get into that kind of situation. It was an experience that Niles wanted to have. So he called this guy chicken and then ended up getting assaulted, and he fell onto a fork. And, of course, that meant that if that guy sued Frasier for touching him, then Niles could sue him in return. And I thought it was a nice way to include Niles a little bit more. And then we end with Daphne swinging her underwear around in the lift or the elevator because she turned some guy's clothes pink as revenge for constantly dumping out her washing. So that wasn't too bad. But again, don't necessarily agree that that was the right thing to do. Hyde Crane Drifter is a painfully relatable episode in a lot of ways. And I think if you can relate to this, it's one that you'll get a lot out of. I also think there are some great messages, some really strong points that definitely provide some interesting food for thought. Needless to say, this is an episode of Frasier that I really thoroughly enjoy.